Hello and welcome to the Mindspo podcast. My name's Rochelle Fox. I am your host, and today I have a very special episode because I'm sitting down with Rebecca Campbell. Now, if you don't know Rebecca, you are in for a treat. She's a fellow Australian, an expat, a mystic, a spiritual teacher, and an incredible author who has just released her fourth book, Your Soul Had a Dream, Your Life Is It. Now, Rebecca's work has been deeply special to me personally. I still remember finding her first ever book, Light is the New Black, back when I was starting my own spiritual journey, and her words have been a guiding light for me ever since. So honestly, getting to sit down with her here in London and have this conversation, it felt like a very full circle and very surreal moment for me. In this conversation, we cover so much. We go into what it means to be spiritual in today's world, Rebecca's journey with motherhood and how it transformed her own path, moving through different seasons, especially those winter periods that so many of us try and avoid, finding balance between creating and producing in our modern world, and Rebecca's take on this was so beautiful. We also go into the special kind of grief that comes when friendships end and what true beauty really means, way beyond the filters and the perfection that we see in our world today. I actually kicked off this interview by asking Rebecca a question that I feel so many people ponder and not many people know how to answer. And that question was, what actually is a soul? And what does that word really mean? And well, this is her answer.
Well, it seems like a basic question, but it is really one of the greatest mysteries there is, which has fascinated mystics, theologians, philosophers, scientists through the ages. So it's a big question, really. In its simplest form, for me, I see the soul as that part of us that existed before we drew our first breath and will carry on after we exhale our last. It is connected to our intuition, but I believe it's also connected to really this mysterious pulse of life that is the same pulse that causes the planet to spin, flowers to open and close, seasons to come and go. So it's quite a huge mystery. And yet I don't know anyone who hasn't had an experience of their soul. Yeah.
When I think about this book and I think about the evolution of you writing, I remember your first book so vividly that I read. Tell me a little bit about the birth of this book and why you wanted to write it. What was kind of happening for you at the time? What called
For
you?
this book, yeah. Well, to be honest, I've been through a period that we all go through if we go through midlife. I'm 43 now, and it began around 36 going into 43, which is really, they're the midlife transits. I also became a mother during this time, but it's not a book about being a mother. It's a book about really saying yes to rebirth, saying yes to change. And I really believe that we're living in such changing times now. No one is immune to it. And so it's all about really saying yes to the deepest call of our soul, and also saying yes to surrendering to the not knowing of that. Because what I've discovered is that, it's easy to be like, I want to transform, I want to change my life and all of that. And it seems like when you embark on this journey of awakening, it doesn't often come when everything's working out. It comes when it's not. And then, it brings us to our knees and then we say yes to it. And I think it takes a lot of courage to say yes to it. It takes a lot of courage to basically be like, okay, everything that I knew for sure, I need to loosen my grip on in order to be who I'm becoming.
When you think about surrendering, what's been your process of surrendering in your life? Like if you could think about writing this book and the process that you were going through when you were writing it, what were you surrendering and maybe letting go of to birth this new creation?
Well, it's interesting. I never knew if I wanted to be a mum, and I assumed I would, but really I didn't realize how scared of it I was. And so when I knew that I wanted to be a mum and I became pregnant and a lot of stuff came up for me and a lot of fear around it, around the physicality of giving birth. From a young age, I always knew I came here for a reason. Even when I was a little girl, I would tell my mum, I'm here for a reason. You'll find out what it is one day. But I always felt this urgency to get it done and all of that. And so I think I was afraid of becoming a mum would take me away from my purpose.
Oh, I feel that. Oh, you just hit me in my like, oh, I'm there.
Yeah.
I'm very similar to you.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want kids, and it feels very interesting to hear someone else go through that same journey.
It's a huge one. And, you know, and I have deep respect for people who choose not to as well. And I know that being able to as well is a privilege. It's a huge topic. For me, yeah, it was hugely transformative. What I discovered for me is that, of course, if I didn't become a mum, my life would look very different. But having kids has only deepened my path. Definitely there's things that maybe might have happened had I not had kids, but there's no part of me that regrets it personally. And as like I'm a spiritual teacher, I'm an artist, I'm definitely someone who has always liked alone time and all of that. And having kids, it's like sensory overload. And so there's parts that I find challenging. But one of my biggest fears was that it would take me away from my path, and it has only deepened it. And I think it was because of the amount of fear that I had around even just the physicality of birth. I went all in. Yeah. And so in answer to your question, how do I surrender? It's the teachings that I experience through studying birth, through studying the contractions and the expansions. I met some incredible people who taught me about literally what happens to the body when you give birth. And not all people give birth in this same way. My dear friend, Binny Dansby, she's in her mid-80s. I met her when I was pregnant with my son. She actually did the first water birth in America. Used to drive around with a bathtub in the back of a car. Yeah. So she came into my life, and she taught me a lot about this process of saying yes to life and opening through the contractions. If you study trauma, for example, the same thing happens. It's the codes are there in nature, which is birth, right? And so you have the contraction, but after that contraction, if you don't resist it, you expand more. And then the contraction comes again, and you expand more. The same principles apply with the spiritual journey, and the spiritual journey is a thing called life as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. So yeah.
Wow. It's a whole breakdown leading to the breakthrough, that whole concept. That's so true in my own life.
Yeah.
I never heard someone explain it like that with the contractions though.
But it's everywhere in nature. So the seasons do it. Like, look at the rose, right? It was concerned of just staying tied in the bud, which is like connected to spring, and or if it just like was like so attached to being in the full bloom, which, you know, the very thing that we're captivated by with the rose, then if it didn't release its petals and surrender and just like cut itself back as well, the next bud wouldn't come. And so we're kind of cut off from the mystery school of life, which is nature. It's everywhere. Yeah.
It's so funny. You actually had this part in the book that I wrote down, which is you speak about the importance of embracing all the seasons of life.
Yeah.
Summer, winter, autumn. What has been your process of moving through a winter? Because I got so many people are scared of that winter or that autumn, that shedding. Like even when we look as women at the menstrual cycle, we have so much, I'm just before my period. It's there is such a rejecting of this time. I'd love you to.
Well, it's perfect. We're in London now, right? And
dead of winter.
It is dead of winter. Well, we were talking about, we're both from Australia originally. I had lived in London at this stage. It was 2011 going into 2012, that winter. And I knew for a very long time, since I was a teenager, and I would have been early 30s, I think, at this stage, I knew what I was being called to do. I knew there was a book in me. I knew it all. I was scared, blah, blah, blah. Working as a creative director in advertising, and had lost 2 friends very suddenly, and my relationship of 11 years ended, and I could have gone back to Australia for Christmas like I would normally, but my ex was going to be there, and I knew it wasn't in my best interest. So I was like, I'm going to give myself a winter. I'm going to just stay here. I knew that's what I needed to do, but I had never done that before. And, normally I had like loads of friends in London. Everyone had left. Like I had no one in London, and I was even going to go see my friend in Scotland, and then that fell through. And so I ended up going somewhere for Christmas, but I was like the Christmas orphan. But really, I was here in London all on my own. And I don't know if you remember, but back in 2011, 2012 was like the end of the world, right? So I basically had London like total all by myself, Bridget Jones style. And it was like, is the world going to end? And it was the most life-changing winter of my life because I let myself sink in fully. And that was when I started my website, I started my Instagram. Literally 6 months later, I got my book contract. I met my husband soon after. Like it was allowing myself to not distract and, busy myself and be in that amazing kind of like bright summer that Australia could have offered me. It was staying here. And yeah, it changed my life. Yeah. And, we've just had a winter here and we're in it now. And my kids got really, really sick. It was like full on, but it reset us. Yeah. So yeah, I always thought I was summer girl through and through, but I'm starting to see the medicine.
I love that. One thing I want to say about your book is when I was going through it, I look at the contents page, and your words and your work has always been very much medicine to me. You were someone that you write in such a way that I feel touches the soul, which is why I love the title of this book and that energy. And then I was reading, there were just some chapter titles. I was like, it was exactly what I needed to hear. So there are a few that I've pointed out that I'd just love you to elaborate on. And I think when I wanted to interview you, I was like, I need everyone to read this book in our community because I feel like it's a sort of big book that will be on your bookshelf and you'll pick it up no matter what season you're in. And there's something for you in that season.
And it is a good book because I'm dyslexic myself, and are you?
Yes.
And I'm not a reader. I'm the slowest reader in the world, and so it's why all my books have short chapters, so you can just open it up and you can just read it. So you don't actually need to read this book cover to cover. You can use it like an oracle. All my books you can.
That's to me, I love a book like that because I feel like these are the sorts of books that, this is such a coffee table book.
Yeah.
This is, you have it on your coffee table and it just feels so, comforting. It has like a comforting energy to it. But I had a few chapters that I just was like, oh, okay, hit me. On page 235, you had creating versus producing.
Oh,
Mystic versus machine. I just want to read your words here.
Yeah, go for it.
So this is the challenge for the artist, for the mystic, to create, not produce. The mystic creates, the machine produces. Anyone can produce pretty much anything if they try. No one can create just like you. For me, I read those words and I got tingles because I think as artists, mystics in this day and age, I feel this in my bones. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about that chapter, that message.
Well, yeah, in this modern age of scrolling in particular, bite-sized content and it's like, and so many options, it's just overwhelming for the creative, for the artist. And, I think that if you have the capacity to understand how media works as well, which you clearly do, I know I do. I had a background as a creative director. I was in advertising. I had incredible training where as a copywriter, I would have to write like 200 headlines to get one chosen by mentors back in the day, which was kind of like, it was good training, but it was also a bit abusive, really. But I know how to produce, but anyone can produce. They really, really can. And I think that we need to resist the urge, particularly if there is money involved, which if we are devoting ourselves to our calling, it is part of us as mystics, as artists these days to try and work out how to do. And it's incredible that we can do that. But the catch is, it's this comparison game. It's this, the moment, whether it's working with a publisher, whether it's working with, I don't know, an agent or whatever, their interest is to say this works, repeat. And that is all well and good, but then the moment you feel trapped is the moment that you're disconnected from your soul. And it is a real balance. Like, we are in this modern age as mystics, as artists, we're not meant to be in a cave where we have these tools to be able to share, but it's at what costs, and getting that balance right. And yeah.
How do you balance that a little bit in your own life?
Oh gosh, it's a forever struggle. So this year, I was saying to you before we started filming, I've committed, what I know, I'm a projector in human design. I'm a 4 on the Enneagram, 3 wing. I was raised to be a 3. I can really bring the 3 in, which is the achiever, but it's not my soul medicine. My soul medicine is the artist. And so I've committed to taking Fridays off. And my word for this year is rest, which is, it seems so simple. If you know me, it's huge that I've done that. And I've already noticed the potency that has shifted in me making those decisions. And so, but it kind of takes discipline to not be disciplined. I don't need help with discipline. Yeah. I need help the other way.
I love that. It's so funny, in my book, I wrote this section on discipline versus devotion. And for me, it's like devotion, which I know you're so big on. That is what I need in my life, because I can be disciplined, but I don't necessarily get what I actually want in that discipline. But when I'm in that devotion,
And I think you've really hit the nail on the head there with, like, when it comes to us working, because work can just be an addiction just like any other. And it's like, what are we after approval? Like, why are we doing this? Whereas if you bring yourself back to the devotion, then it's like, it's not about the outcome. The act of creating is the enriching thing.
I love that. There was another section in your book that hit me. It was page 107, when friendships end. This one, I think as adults, we don't talk about this enough. And I think that it's something that happens to everyone. And in your book, you really talk about how it's a special kind of grief that arises when a friendship ends. There's no funeral, no divorce papers, and there's rarely any condolences. We know that some friendships aren't meant to be there for a lifetime and some for a season, and that we change just as others do. Wow. That for me it's a topic that I feel, when I saw that in your book, I was like, wow, I feel like so many people need to acknowledge that. And it's not easy. And I think in a spiritual path, I've even been challenged sometimes where I want to love and just keep everyone and keep the peace. And that's my own coding. I'd love you to talk a little bit about why that was important to put in this book.
Well, yeah, personally, I had like a particular relationship, which was a friendship, and where it was like, there was no real conversation. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, it was in a real difficult period of my life. And it was a grief that hit me that went on for a long time, because there was, like, with a romantic relationship ending, it's fine to talk about that person. You just know that when you're having a breakup, you're going to talk and talk and talk and rant and rage and da-da-da-da-da. It's accepted. Yeah. Whereas with this friendship, it sent me into such a sad place, because I had no way of honoring it or understanding it. And I know I'm not alone in this. So many of my friends have been through it.
And maybe feel so heard reading that.
And
no
we're
one
not meant
talks
to
about it.
be best friends with everyone forever, or, colleague, whatever. We're all changing constantly. And I think this way of like gripping onto a relationship and it having to be, and not being able to like have the conversation with someone, or be fine to kind of just let that other person go for a little bit and then come back in our lives if we want. Yeah, I think it's a real challenging thing for us to do. And it's also because, like, our society is so bereft of like honoring endings as well. Like we see endings just like winter as like this thing to avoid. And a good example of like an ending that I honored for one of my really good friends, Amy Firth. She lived in London. I went to uni with her in Australia. And she had worked at Unilever, a big company, for pretty much her whole time of being in London. And she'd done her interfaith ministry training. She was leaving to follow her passion. And there was a group of us who honored the ending of that career, of that threshold for her. And we watched her, literally this was all planned, watched her ride the elevator down for the last time. And then we went over to the Thames and we drew a line on the pavement in chalk and watched her step over the threshold. And it was like, I'm doing it. And it was amazing. It was so, so simple. But we don't have those rituals, you know? So yeah.
When people hear the word ritual, I think so many people want to have those, but maybe feel blocked or they don't know how to hold a ritual for that friendship and that ending for that friend. Was that just something that you all came up with?
Yeah. I think Amy actually was very clear in what she wanted. She wanted us to witness her with the elevator. So it's just a simple thing. It's like I'd watched her ride that elevator so many different times when I'd be waiting for her and we'd go for a drink or whatever. But it's not so much about like what you're doing, but the meaning you bring to it and the intention you bring to it and the consciousness you bring to it. So I would call it, so the ancient Greeks spoke of this thing called kairos time, which I call soul time or sacred time, where you step into the space of the soul. You step into the space of the soul by sharing a breath with someone, by properly seeing the light behind their eyes, you know, by lighting a candle and having a moment. Whenever I lead people in ritual or teach people how to do ritual, it's not about all the things. You can do a ritual with rice in your cupboard and, you know, a candle from last year's birthday. You know, it's about the meaning you bring to it and what you're honoring. Yeah.
Okay, there's another one that hit me. You wrote, we're all running from something.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So when you had this question in your book and it was, we're all running from something, what's running you? And it made me think about my own life. And I definitely run a lot in my own life. And when you wrote that, I was wondering, was there something that you were running from or that you felt was, I think sometimes we write things in our words. Obviously, this is something you've experienced.
Yeah.
I know it's a very personal question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's many answers to that. And at different times in my life, I'd have different answers. I think in some times it would have been overworking, particularly in my previous career, which like served me in many ways as well. But I also think this was part of my soul path. But then you realize, is it sustainable for you? You know, we're changing constantly. But for me, two things can be true at the same time, right? So I think on one hand, my soul was calling me to remember who I was. And I needed to go away from everyone who knew me for me to really uncover that. It really helped me, to really remember and discover and uncover the truth of who I am, all of it, and have the courage to express it. It's a lot easier to do that when you're not with people who know you. For some, definitely was for me. And so that was a huge part of my soul path. When, particularly as I like past my Saturn returns, like when I had children, really, one thing that I was not ready for in having children is there's this thing called reparenting where you have you heard of it?
Yes.
I had not heard of it, where it's basically the theory is, and excuse me if I don't get this completely accurately, but my experience of it is that as the child is a certain age, it brings up the unconscious things in you that haven't been healed. And so in that experience for me, it then uncovered things that I had been avoiding, not consciously, but things that were literally stored in the cells and I think of like, you know, I've had autoimmune issues early in my life and I'm like, that was me running from something. I didn't understand it until I did. And then we need to loosen our grip and be like, whoa, this thing that, like for me, the overworking, it gave me a lot. a lot of praise, a lot of satisfaction too, but it wasn't sustainable, you know?
I love that because I just think that there are so many points that when I was going through your book, I felt a lot of people don't touch on. That just sort of hit me. They were sort of just truths that made me really like sink in and go, oh yeah, whew, that's something. There's just something in every single chapter to really sit with, which I think is what I've always loved about your work. Like when I first found like Light is the New Black, it brought so much to ponder on. And I think that that's what I love about this, because I feel like you can just read a few pages and sit with your tea or your journal and then just kind of go on your own spiritual quest with these words. And I was like, oh, I wasn't thinking about that. And you'll always, as you said, always have a different answer, depending on
based on where you are. Yeah, exactly.
Which is, I think, books like this, they meet you where you're
wherever
at,
you are,
and you can have it for 10 years, and you come back to it, and you're like, 10 years ago the answer was this, and now this is coming up, and that to me is, you know, medicine.
And then what that's really doing is just connecting you to your soul. And I'm super passionate about this, that we all have the answers within. Yeah. We've been taught, most of us, to look outside of ourselves, but if we manage to give ourselves the container, the moment to listen, and the more we do it, the easier it is to recognize the voice. The number one question I get asked is, how do you tell the difference between your intuition, like voice of your soul, and your head? And the best way I know, and I know you teach this, is like showing up, carve time out to spend time with your soul. And it's just like a new friendship when you first meet that person. If you're in a busy room at a party and you've only had coffee with them a couple of times, you're not going to be able to recognize their voice. But the more time you spend with them, it'll be a loud, busy party, and you will even just sense their energy. Same thing exists with your soul. Yeah.
What's your favorite ways to meet yourself these days? Like where you're at you with your own spiritual practice, how do you find stillness within?
Yeah, I really like devotional chanting, like kirtan. I love it. Dancing, particularly if I'm feeling like big feelings, and I think collective energy too. Yeah. Letting it move through my body. I've noticed at times when I get stuck, it's when I know I'm disconnected from my soul, and I'm probably either I've got emotions of my own or else, like collectively in the world, or friends or people that I've interacted with that I haven't let move through me. So it all comes back to the body right now for me. Yeah.
I've been on that journey myself. Of the beginning of my spiritual path was so mental.
Yeah.
I was so in my mind, and now it's so much more the somatic practices, like getting back in my body.
And you know, because what I see happening so much these days is there's like all this like division. Oh my God. If I look at my journey, but I think at first there is this mental awakening. It's a mind awakening. Yeah. Then for many of us it's heart. Then it's body. One is not better or worse than the other. And the practices that really probably met you when you're in that phase are different to what do now. And doesn't mean one's right or wrong. It's just what we need.
I love that you say that, because I think that with, let's just be honest, marketing.
Yeah.
Spirituality these days, we do have this thing of like, oh, it's somatic is it, mind is out. Yeah. And I think that we have to remember that we're all meeting ourselves at different points. That's,
exactly.
I needed to hear that one. So thank you. I had this other one that, it just hit me. The difference between beauty. Like your whole concept on beauty on the book, and pretty and beauty. I just love you to talk.
Yeah, pretty and beauty and pretty
perfection. And that for me, in the age of social media, it's a really interesting thing, our relationship with beauty these days. Like what is beauty, and finding beauty in nature, and then beauty in nature versus this kind of artificial concept of beauty that is being born, which is still beauty, but in a different way. I'd love you just to talk about your journey with that.
Well, I think the thing about beauty is it's very different from being pretty or perfect. Beauty is anything that takes our breath away. When our breath is taken away, we're in Kairos time, we're in the moment, right? And again, birth is beautiful. It's not pretty. It is guts and blood and a miracle. I remember when my son came out, I spoke to my therapist when I was trying to unpack the birth and be like, I just don't understand why. Like I fucking knew I was giving birth. But when I looked down at him, I was like shocked to see a baby there. And I was like, was I just not, like, why was it? And she was like, how else is one to react when you see a miracle being performed right in front of your eyes? Now that was beauty. It was not pretty. It was so far from pretty, but it was the most beautiful thing there is. But same thing with the rose. You know, when those petals fall to the earth, it's not pretty, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful. If you see an old person who has life and light in their eyes, that is beauty. It's beauty. You know, we've been taught, particularly as women, to have perfection. And if you look at, like, God, the filters, but not even the filters, just what everyone's doing to their bodies and their faces, everyone's just starting to look the same. And they're looking perfect for sure. But then it's this like insatiable hunger for that perfection, and then you lose the beauty. So beauty is what life is with the extremes. Beauty can't exist with just the light. Beauty has the shadow too. And we know that the light isn't possible without, well, true light isn't possible without facing the shadow. Anyone who has properly found their light, it's because they've created enough space within themselves to face all of the other stuff. Beauty is grief as well, but grief isn't possible without love. It wouldn't be possible. And so beauty holds what Marianne Woodman, who is, she's passed, but she is, I never met her in real life, but I've studied all her work deeply. And she talks about the role of the conscious feminine being able to hold the opposites, the tension of the opposites. So if you to look at something like love, you're going to experience grief if you live with your heart open. But what if you saw grief as evidence of how much you loved? It's like anyone I know who has experienced the loss of a loved one, you're in this like liminal space when you're grieving, where even the sound of someone laughing hysterically sounds like someone grieving hysterically. They're actually closer than we think, these opposites. And I think this is what it is to truly live. And that is beauty.
Rebecca, I have absolutely loved this conversation. If that doesn't tell everyone that is listening to go and get your book, to just immerse themselves in your work, I don't know what does. You've been such an influence for me on my own journey, and I've absolutely loved meeting you and having you on this podcast. Quite literally a dream come true for my soul.
Yay.
So
it's been amazing. Thank you.
This is the incredible book. I'm going to have all the links to everything that you do down below in the description box. I know you've got to go, and I just thank you so much for this literally quite beautiful conversation.
Thank
really
you so
appreciate
much.
you.
Yay.
I really hope you enjoyed that episode. I'm going to have a link down below to all of Rebecca's work in the show notes so you can explore her books, her Instagram, her own YouTube, and everything that she does. And I also just want to say thank you so much for being here and supporting the Mindspo podcast. If you want to hear more conversations like this in 2025 and beyond with other thought leaders and people that are here to inspire you on your own path, one thing that you can do to make that happen and be part of our journey is by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or rating us on Spotify. Or if you're listening on YouTube, be sure to subscribe. The little things that you do, like subscribing and leaving reviews, I cannot tell you how much of a difference they make to this podcast. And they really go a long way in supporting us and making these conversations happen. I'm sending you so much love, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for joining me for this episode. You can discover more from Mindspo on Instagram and TikTok by following @Mindspo and myself @Rochelle_Fox. If this episode inspired you, then please pass it on and share the love. And lastly, always remember,
You create your own reality. So go and make some magic.